very quickly give us some feedback on their conversation in their groups, please?
I have been taking some notes. So because I obviously I wasn't writing them on the screen, I've been taking some notes myself.
Oh, fantastic.
If my group is happy, I'll just read them back, but then you can add anything that I've missed. Okay. So in the first group, the situation was that the person was still in the abusive situation and and couldn't leave. So what we would do, what we ask to the person, to the woman, is that first of all, if she feels safe. So if she needs an interpreter, it's a practical term to have a conversation about some issue, and what is the situation around her. So if there's anyone in the room, if she's isolating, or if she's with a partner, if she's around, if she can speak. If it's not safe, as been suggested by Abby, one thing that we could do is to organize some ways of communicating, some alternative way, or support, or giving advice. That, for example, it could be through delivery of some good, or it could be like toiletries, female toiletries. That is something that it's more private, and during the lockdown can have happened. So within, like inside, for example, the toiletries, you can leave a message or like a number to call, or anything. Another thing is to consider if there are children in the family, because there will be different practical needs in terms of safeguarding too. There's questions about status. For example, if we know that they're both refugees, they have status, but depending on that, on their claim, for example, if they're family reunion, or if they're they've claimed asylum separately, it could have different legal, could be given different legal advice, and in the way like she can exit that abusive situation and change accommodation. That could be different way of changing. Then in terms of explaining as caseworker, there's we need to focus on the person centered. We have to be person centered, so focus on what the request of the person is. And so, for example, if she's just looking for like changing accommodation, and maybe she's not that willing to disclose, maybe we know that we can help with that. Maybe we should focus on that and seeing what kind of level of disclosure is needed at that very stage. Also, we can suggest calling the police if there's an immediate risk, and use the silent call, which is the 55 number.
Yeah.
Reiterate that we're not judging, so making feel the person that we are remembering confidentiality and how we work, which is very complicated. That is more complicated over the phone than in person, because that level of professionalism that is missing. But explaining, for example, has been said that we are in a private place as we're speaking too, so not just checking if they are in a private space, but also us. And close questions if there's more difficult topics to talk about. And we said facilitate disclosure over the phone, probably this to clarify that we are in a private space. And also to, if there's no disclosure or there's not the right time, to organize another meeting to talk about different topics, or just organize another meeting when it's best, so the person can prepare in a way and expect a time to have this conversation. So I think that's pretty much it, but if you want to add anything else, please do so.
That's great. There will be some crossover with what we've discussed as well. Does anybody from my group too want to, give us some feedback, please?
Sorry, I didn't take any notes, but I'm going to jump.
Okay, just a little summary, that would be enough.
I think we, gosh, where to start? I think Mohammed mentioned something about whether or not the woman and her husband are refugees. What sort of status have they got? To look at that. We looked at when you speak to the woman, because there are children involved, there are possibly a case of you might have to share the information she's giving you with other agencies. So possibly the social workers where the children involved. We might also share that information with a charity that deals with domestic violence abuse, because the woman might have to be referred there. You might also want at the initial stage to just find out whether the woman is by herself at the moment, is a partner actually there, or is she in a safe environment to actually talk to you. Also, she mentioned that the children she's got friends, but we don't really know much about this friend. So there might be, again, a safeguarding issue there. Please correct me if I'm wrong, what I'm saying. And we also mentioned that if the woman was going to leave immediately, I think you mentioned this, Virginia, should have to make sure possibly she's got a case with things packed, take all the relevant things, make sure you've got your iPhone charger, just little things that you might not think of immediately, but you need to when you're making a quick exit.
That's right.
Also, possibly give her, in case it's a real emergency, then she might have to go maybe to the police station if she felt her life was really in danger. And I mentioned that this is actually a case that happened with us, where one of the women presented herself at the police station because she knew she could turn up at the police station. I don't know, I'm not sure if I've covered everything.
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing oh, go ahead. Go in.
Hi, I will try with my phone. I don't know if the sound is any better now.
Yeah.
I think we also mentioned, there was someone who said that we would also contact the Home Office Safeguarding Hub, because if they're already in asylum support, then they can be accommodated, and they can find accommodation for them. And also there was talk about referring to the local domestic abuse charities, organisations, like Women's Aid or something, I think.
That's right. So we looked first of all at is this an imminent risk? So for the assessment on the safety, and somebody mentioned about ways in which you could facilitate the disclosure by asking open questions. How would you feel? What is it that worries you? How does that make you feel? It was a slightly better definition, a way of defining that. Obviously, yes, we assessed the situation. Somebody raised that really good point of, is being with a friend actually safe? Does the husband, is he an husband, partner know where the friend lives? Would she go to and get angry? And then, yes, we mentioned calling 999 or physically going to the police. We could mention how the silent call works. If the children are old enough, no, I'm adding this one. If the children are old enough, they could help as with a safety word, when to call 999 themselves, or go and get help from a neighbor or something. And where is she at when you're receiving calls, and yeah, all of a sudden it's not a safe place to be. Either the husband might still be around, or it's in an appropriate location. And yeah, always prefer a face-to-face appointment if possible. We also are aware of the difficulties of working remotely in this context at the moment. So just a few minutes, because I need to give time to Helen from the safeguarding team. The next slide, just very, very briefly, we've covered all of them across the two scenarios, but yeah, always remember safety first, call 999 in an emergency. And I would say don't push for a disclosure. And that's tempting in a phone call, I guess, to ask a lot of questions, but try to build a relationship over time if that's a viable route. Step to help with a disclosure and validate. That's something we do very well at the Red Cross, I believe. Never push a survivor to leave the relationship. Remember, people need to make informed decisions, and one of the most important referrals, apart from the safety planning with, like, I don't know, with a specialist organization, is again, because we're not specialists, right? We deal with domestic abuse disclosure, but we're not a specialist organization on domestic abuse. One of the most important referrals will be to an immigration advisor, because leaving will likely have an impact on their status. For example, if one was a refugee, the other one was an asylum seeker, maybe their claims are joined. We don't know that. So one thing that I think is nice to ask is, what would you like to happen next? Because we've seen from activities before that people can, have mixed feelings, and so you use empowerment and a person-centered approach. And then get advice and report from safeguarding.
So I was just going to say, actually, when you're talking about empowerment, it might also be nice to mention to the woman to just say how brave she's been to actually contact you, because it will have taken so much, so many steps. For her to finally decide, do I do this? Is this the right thing to do? Am I going to make things worse, or will I make them better, or will they be worse? So it's good to mention to that person that you've really done it. What you've done is very brave, because the last thing we want, obviously, is the person might approach you the one time, but then has a change of mind, or for whatever reason, either because they're scared or whatever, and not get back again.
Yeah. Really good point. Validate, the key element, I would say. Ambra, we're running a little bit behind. The next session is on working remotely. We could put it as a handout instead, or like leave the space to from the safeguarding perspective.
I have a question here. Shall I ask it now? It's related to the topic we just discussed. Do we report the incident via dead text? And if so, how it helps, why we do that? I'm not very sure, because once I report, my manager told me to report such an incident, and we resolved that. We signposted her to some organization, but weeks later, I received an email from someone.
Oh, thank you for this question, Mohammed. Thank you. This is key. Yes, data. This is the key point that I want to make in all these sessions, is that, yes, the database is one thing, and then you report on Datix and put, thank you for doing that. And also speak, all the domestic abuse cases need to be reported to safeguarding. So have a phone call with them for advice and next steps. Yes. As I said, working remotely is a big issue, and we want to discuss it, but we also want to leave time at the end for questions, and maybe we can mix the two things. So Helen, are you there? Can you give us a quick overview of safeguarding. No, tell me you're there.
I think I just wanted to say that yes, we've already covered quite a lot, but from the scenario. So yeah, the online working remotely, I think we've already said most of it.
And we can send a handout, I guess.
Yeah. Helen, are you there?
Oh no.
I've put these diagram. We have 3 parts. Actually, we'll send it maybe in a different way because this is very big. Like it's not really easy to read. But the 3 parts are like is the pattern, what you should do in terms of safeguarding for adult safeguarding. Importantly, to save this number 030000040377 on your phone, just to give them a call anytime.
Yeah. So one of the things that the Helen was actually going to tell us is that the vast majority, so her feedback was that the vast majority of cases are documented properly, but there's a few small numbers that don't get reporting, and that can have dangerous or difficult consequences for the family. So always go to safeguarding. What we wanted to do with the manual, to refer to the manual and use some of the tips to get some initial information, but without again pushing. And always consider domestic abuse as high risk situations. And the other thing that the safeguarding team is doing at the moment is that there'll be domestic abuse.
Can I just check whether I can be heard?
Yes, we can hear you now, Helen.
We can hear now.
Sorry.
I could hear everything that you were saying, but
sorry.
You couldn't hear me. I'm so sorry.
No.
So I dialed in again. So yes.
Fantastic.
Yes, so thank you very much for inviting me to participate in this training session. It's been very interesting to participate, to listen to people's views, and great to be able to put some names to faces. I know I've spoken a lot to some people, not at all to others, and so it's really nice to see a group of you together. And I think that some of the conversations that have been had around scenarios and gathering information and all of that kind of thing has been a really good insight for me into. I don't think I'll say anything that's different to what's already been said, but I'll just go through some key points from a safeguarding viewpoint. And if you have any questions, then I can answer them after I've been through this. And if there's anything following this that you would like to ask me about, then feel free to contact me and I'll do my best to answer that. So I think the first thing that I would say is to just reiterate that the British Red Cross is not a specialist domestic abuse organisation. And we're not specialist advisors. But what we have to do is we have to recognise that in all cases, domestic abuse is a safeguarding risk. And what we must do is report our safeguarding assurance team and based on
we can
Helen, you're breaking up.
I wonder if you have any questions, since we are running out of time. It's 11:30
yeah,
already.
Exactly. Please start.
Yeah, or you can put them on the chat box, write them on the chat box, and then we'll answer them maybe alongside the follow-up email to make it easier. If you have any questions, please. Or if you want to ask them now.
Yeah,
Sorry,
ask them now. I mean, if somebody has to leave, I totally understand. If you want to stay a few minutes later, it'd be good to get questions answered if you want to.
I ask something.
Yes, Seb.
So if the potential risk is greatest at the point of separation, and we're not a specialist domestic abuse organization, like how do you balance the potential advice that you give? For example, people talking about practical tips for leaving. Is that something that we should provide? For example, saying have a packed bag, this kind of thing. Is that something we should be providing, or is it more that we should be listening and then referring to other domestic abuse specialist organizations?
I mean, that's a really good point, and that touches on our roles. So we're not specialists means exactly that we should aim to refer. So we always try to recognize, report, and refer. That's also what the domestic abuse manual wants to do as a guidance. And that's tricky. Where does that stop? So you would aim to get a specialist organization on board, and there you, depending on your capacity, you could also try to do triangulation, which means you sort of follow up the case, you try to chase it for the client and remain, like, it depends on your role, and it also depends on the relationship of the client. If it's a one-off and they're mentioning that they left, like in the second scenario that we looked at, then you want to have some practical tips that are handy, that are relevant to our SRFL clients, because sometimes you go on Women's Aid and they've got them on, there's nothing controversial in theory about some practical tips, I would say, but then having the car keys handy is not really relevant to most of our clients. So you want to be sensitive about that, and also that you don't seem to be pushing the client into that. And you can have safety tips, like if they just mentioned that they often, there's a lot of physical abuse, you can give practical tips. If you have an escalation of the issue, write down the address, make sure you have the address of the nearest police station that you can go and present yourself, or if they're in the situation, try to avoid the kitchen, because that's the place where you're most at risk. So so tips doesn't mean that you then do a whole plan for their safety. No, we're not in that position to be able to plan like long term for somebody that might be stalking the victim. No, we're not in that position, and we shouldn't take on that role on ourselves. But always going through safeguarding, and I think Helen is back, can
Hopefully
really help with like the support that you need, isn't it? So Helen, do you want to come back to helping us to explain the importance of safeguarding as a way of supporting and a caseworker, and recognizing that we're not the specialists, and
yes,
we cannot solve it all. Or see the whole situation. We'll have blind spots. Yes, we can hear you. Thank you, Helen.
Yeah, I have no idea why the audio dropped at the key moment. So I'm afraid I don't have headphones from my other phone, so that's why I'm holding the phone so close. Yes, so yeah, I think you heard up until the point that I said that we don't expect you to have all the answers at the point that you call safeguarding. Part of the point of ringing safeguarding is so that we can look at what what we may still need to know, because often on that first call, there's some indicators of domestic abuse which are of a concern, but we may not know the whole picture at that point. So that would be the first call to safeguarding, and it may be the first of many, many calls that result from there. So in addition, obviously, to reporting to safeguarding, we would recommend that you discuss things with your line manager, but be aware that it isn't always practical to do that at the time of disclosure. And what you need to do is to make calling safeguarding a priority. And remember that safeguarding has an emergency out of hours service 24/7. So, hopefully you're not getting a call late, but there is an emergency out of hours response where one of us is on call at all times. I think one important aspect is to say that the Safeguarding Assurance team do offer staff and volunteers a level of protection in that we take responsibility for the advice and the guidance which is given, which means that it, sounds a bit grand, but in it, that we carry the risk, if you like, of the advice that we give. And I do think that it's worth noting that within the disciplinary procedure for staff, one of the things which is identified as an example of gross misconduct is to breach or disregard the safeguarding policy and the advice of the Safeguarding Assurance team. So, it's really clear that we have to be the advisors in cases around domestic abuse. I just draw your attention, of course, to the flow chart, which says that in an emergency situation, you would get involved with the emergency services prior to calling the SAT team. So I just sort of did a list of kind of the key things to consider. And the first one is always, if anyone is in immediate danger, then to call 999. And as someone said, I think it was in one of the breakout rooms, there is an option to press 55 or to remain silent if the survivor feels that they're not able to talk in that situation. But some other key things, and I think everybody covered these between the breakout rooms, we would always have to consider whether it's safe to call or communicate with the person who's made the disclosure. Because obviously as soon as something is communicated outside of that family environment, that increases the risk massively to the person who is, experiencing domestic abuse. We would always have to consider whether there are children in the relationship, and that's the aspect of what we do regarding that would have to be discussed with the SAT team. Although we do have a statutory obligation to report in children who are involved in that does need a discussion with us so that we can, just have a talk around what is known and what is unknown about the children in there. From a SAT point of view, we'd be looking to check that there was a specialist domestic abuse service involved, whether or not the police have been involved, and depending quite often on the status of the survivor, they may or may not want the police to be involved. And it's very important that we take into consideration the wishes of the person who's made the disclosure. We, a bit further down the line, would be asking whether a DASH or a MARAC had been completed, whether there was a safety plan as a result of that, whether there was any plans to move into an emergency refuge space, and of course, whether or not there's appropriate legal advice in place. But those are all of the things that we would discuss with you as caseworkers to, check the next steps as far as that's concerned. There's a lot of detail in the manual, which has been shared with me. So I just thought that I would go, kind of the top line points. I think when my audio was off, Virginia was explaining that in most cases, domestic abuse is reported extremely promptly to the safeguarding assurance team. But one of the things that I would say is that situations can move and change incredibly quickly from that first disclosure. And it is really important that updates are given to the SAT team, because that could have an impact on the safety aspect of what had been, decided and agreed at the time. So not only report in the first instance and follow it up with a DATEX report, but also once you've spoken to that person, make sure that they're updated on the SAT team about any changes, so we can review where we were up to, what was in terms of referrals, whether there was additional steps which needed to be put in place as a result of the changes. And there are some examples that I can give on that. And unfortunately, obviously, because of we deal with the disclosures across the 4 nations, we have some really quite alarming stories to tell about that. And in some instances, there have been some catastrophic consequences as a result of further actions which have taken place, which may often aren't known to the caseworkers either. But if there are any changes, then do let us know, because that can have a bearing on what we would suggest and recommend. I think it's also important to say that it's often quite useful just to be able to speak to someone who's a bit more impartial when talking through the case. And it's a huge emotional burden to take on as a caseworker, to listen to someone else's distress. That's a different level of support. But actually to be able to talk through things and to feel that responsibility for taking the appropriate action has been passed on to someone with the specialist knowledge can be hopefully quite helpful to the caseworker as well. So don't feel that something has to be a very complex case. As soon as there is any domestic abuse known, then that's the time to involve the safeguarding assurance team. And what happens is we would always ask you to submit a DATEX on the information that you have at that point. But as soon as the DATEX is submitted, the person that you spoke to on the SAT team would then pick that DATEX up, and then it would become our responsibility to update that case on DATEX. So we to the information as soon as it is reported in, because the data is confidential and is protected. So we obviously rely on updates from you, emails from you, copies of referrals that have been sent to statutory organisations and so on. They're just sent on to us and we attach them to the DATEX. And that's really important because in cases that there are, further action taken, perhaps in relation to the police, or, if there are any kind of consequences as a result of the domestic abuse, perhaps to the person who's been experiencing it, then we could be called to make our notes available to the court, to the police, to children's services, to adult social care, and we have to be accountable for the advice that we have given. So having a chronology of what's happened, having the story there, having up-to-date records and notes is part of what's really important in terms of managing the safety of the case. I think that sort of sums up. I mean, you know, essentially, if it's an emergency, ring 999. If it's not an emergency, then contact us, and we'll be able to talk through whatever the steps should be, the advice, what you've done so far, what you know so far, thinking about other agencies that can help. So I think that hopefully gives everyone an overview of what our position would be in the safeguarding assurance team.
Thank you, Helen. This has been really, so for all the details on the importance of DATEX and how it works from your side. I think it's really interesting. Mohammed, does that, you know, overall answer your question?
Yes,
DATEX and others. Yeah.
Thank you, Helen.
Always go to safeguarding, and it's amazing. Thank you for the support and for giving us the presentation. Does anybody have like a minute question? I mean, we're over already. That can not wait to try to answer. And thank you. So thank you so much for your participation. I think this was really interesting, at least for me. And we'll keep in touch and see some of you at the next sessions.